And we are live. Hello, everyone. Happy Saturday, is it? Not really sure. I'm sure now. It's Saturday. Hello and welcome. And I forgot our second mic again, so please just give me 2 seconds. Hello and welcome to my home. I am Victoria Wilder, author of this beautiful novel, Lullaby of the Lilitu, which I'm quite proud of, even though recently when I was reading it the other day, I found some typos that made me a little bit discouraged. But some of you may already know my experience with my editor and my upset there. But even so, I'm still very proud of this book. And because I'm proud of it and happy to have written it, and because of everything that's going on, the corona situation, again, the isolation that a lot of us are experiencing, the social distancing, that some people are not, it's not their natural way of being. For some people, being connected and spending time in large groups it feels right for them. And for some of us, we're okay with having our alone time. But whatever it is you're experiencing right now, this is not like any other my lifetime. This is not a situation that I feel any of us have experienced in at least 30 years. And so I want to do my best to help people through this any way that I can. One of those ways is storytelling. Storytelling for me has always been very important, and it's helped me through all of my darkest times. And writing this story helped me through some of my darkest times as well. And so I want to share it with you all. And most of you have already heard that because by now I'm sure you've already listened to all of the story up till now. Because if you haven't, you're going to be very confused. And we don't want that for you. So thank you again for being here. And I'm going to go ahead and get started with part 3, chapter 8. Once my senses returned, I changed clothes and ran down through the library to the door at the far back. I pounded the door without a care that Tabitha was probably in the middle of a therapeutic session with one of her rich clients. She didn't often work with humans from the manor, preferring instead to make house calls. From home, she held remote sessions with some of the most powerful of the human elite. The door opened at once, and she pushed me back into the darkened library, shutting it behind her in one swift motion. "What do you think you're doing? You almost ruined 2 months' progress," she whispered. Her look of annoyance morphed into one of concern as I told her of my visitor. She sank into a chair at the table, her fingers trembling as she lit the candle in the center. She didn't speak, so I continued with questions of my own. "In the notebook he gave me, Yuri wrote about a search for other Lilitu," I said. "But he's never found any, and we both know Kyan isn't the most forthcoming. But he does confide in you and Victor. Has he mentioned any others? Who she might be?" Tabitha sighed and toyed with her necklace as she considered her next words. "If I'm correct, her name is Sephora." She licked her lips. "I don't know much, just what Victor's told me. She and Kyan are the first of our kind, and once were lovers. Something happened. She disappeared, and we're not allowed to speak of her. That's all I know. That can't be it. If she was Kyan's lover, wouldn't that make her our mother?" I paced the floor. "There have to be books or some other documents about this Sephora. We must know something." Tabitha shook her head. "We don't have a mother. For the most part. Kyan made each of us on his own." "For the most part?" "Victor helped with me. But Cayenne did the final exchange, and he did it alone. She narrowed her eyes and splayed her hands on the smooth wood of the table. Why would you want to find her anyway? Sephora said she wanted to kill you. She also said she changed her mind. Besides, I've got to do something. I can't just sit on my ass and wait for her to come back. I slammed my fist on the table, growing more agitated by the second. Tabitha's passiveness wore on me. Erie has spent nearly 2 centuries looking for our kind, and she just shows up in my room? She could have killed me right there. You and Yuri, you're just alike. Why must you torture yourselves with this endless search for Lilitu? She looked at me through big brown eyes, pleading with me not to do anything rash. He's wasted 200 years on this Rio. Don't let him waste your life too. Tabitha grabbed my hand and pulled me towards her, forcing me to face her. Her comforting squeeze calmed me, if only for a moment. I shook my head. We aren't just searching for our kind. We're searching for meaning. Tabitha, don't you want to know that there's more out there than what Cayenne tells us? I sighed. How would we even know whether we had a mother when he tells us nothing? She gazed into my eyes, but didn't bother trying to read my thoughts. I didn't need to read her mind to understand her pained expression. I called her sister, but all she did for me came from a mother's heart. In her eyes, I was her daughter. And now I raved about this strange new Lilitu being our mother. I sat next to her, offering a smile I hoped would comfort her and return the squeeze. A clamor in the foyer stole our attention, and we ran to investigate. Samson stood in the center of the great hall, his chest heaving as he mumbled to himself. His Stetson lay near the still open doors, and he paced the room with his hands clasped to his head. He didn't seem to see us enter as he moved back and forth. "Get out!" he growled, pounding at the sides of his head. His eyes darted around the foyer as though searching for something. At last he landed on his apparent target, me. He launched himself at me, knocking me back into the den. I caught myself on a large chair, but he pounced on my back before I regained my footing. He threw me to the floor and raised his fist to hammer down. As he neared me, I caught a whiff of a familiar fragrance, but didn't have any time to think of where I could have smelt it. I rolled aside just as his fist crashed into the floor, sending up a cloud of dust as he crushed a hole into the large bricks. Tabitha tackled him in an instant, and the two wrestled on the floor in a blur of limbs. Samson growled and pushed her down, rolling on top of her. I sped forward and grabbed his shoulders to pull him off of her when a heaviness forced me to my knees. The three of us collapsed to the floor, tied down by the pressure. Cayenne's boots passed by my face, his footsteps echoing through the sudden silence. Samson sprawled on top of Tabitha, growling and struggling against the pressure. Cayenne grabbed Samson's shirt collar and stuck a syringe into his neck, injecting a light blue liquid. After a minute, Samson fell unconscious and the pressure lifted. Tabitha pushed him aside and helped me up. Neither of us spoke. We stared as Cayenne's medicine bag clicked shut and he hauled Samson over his shoulder. He could be menacing, but Samson never attacked anyone in our family. At least he never had before now. Cayenne spoke, answering the questions I was too stunned to ask. Someone has gotten into his head. Cayenne started for the door. He stopped in front of me and caressed my face. He frightened you, my princess. Don't worry. I'll get to the bottom of this. He was halfway up the stairs when my tongue finally caught up with my thoughts. Sephora! I yelled after him. It has to be her! A rush of wind followed him back to the den, and he tossed the unconscious man onto the couch by the time I spoke the last word. He peered at me, grabbing my shoulders. Where did you hear that name? It wasn't a question. He searched my memory for the first-hand view of my encounter with the deadly Lilitu. He cocked his head to the side. His eyes darkened as he looked at me. She gave you her blood. How do you feel? I feel fine, Papa. Who is she? What does she want? He didn't answer. Instead, he thought for a moment before addressing Tabitha. Put him in his bed, he commanded, gesturing to Samson. There's somewhere I have to go, but I will return before he wakes. He made his way towards the door. Tabitha and I followed him into the foyer, and he stopped in the doorway to embrace me. It's best if you stay in the manor until I return, Princess. You can sleep in my room. Tell Victor what happened, and he will guard you. He kissed my forehead and disappeared through the door. I didn't bother following to argue. There was no point. If I wanted answers, they weren't going to come from him. When the doors thumped shut, Tabitha pulled me into a tight hug. Then she smiled a sad smile, cradled Samson in her arms, and sped up the stairs. Chapter 9. With an hour left of darkness, I drank my fill from the reserves, took 2 extra EDS tabs, and set out to complete the task of saving my friend. I readied 2 horses, my Zilla and a brown Clydesdale, Meadow. I mounted the cob and threaded a rope through Meadow's bit-ring. Avance! The horses set into a gallop down the village road. I rode right up to the gates. They were locked, as always, but no guards stood watch. I called out, but no one came. The back of my neck tingled with the sensation that something was off. I grabbed the large iron bars and pulled myself upward and over. From inside, I turned the gears on the lock until I heard the latch thump and the gates swung open. I pulled them close so as not to alert anyone who might be out at this hour, commanded the horses to stay put, then ran through the shadows to the tavern. The copper, sour scent of decaying flesh and dead blood formed a knot in my stomach, in my chest. I neared the tavern and the blood scent thickened. A crash inside. I sped around back and kicked through the door. With all the candles out, darkness enveloped the tavern. The perfume of fresh blood drew saliva to my lips. A small voice cried behind the main bar, and I ran to the sound. Catherine cowered behind the bar, crying and holding her son Elias to her breast. Liam lay motionless beside her, the golden curls framing his face, stained red. He looked like a sleeping angel. A noise came from a dark corner near the door, behind a thick wooden table. A sickening, swishing sound, like someone pressing wine grapes. A heavy wheeze and low growl accompanied the sound of splattering matter. I shuddered as I crept towards the table and rounded the corner. A guard lay on his back, his black shoes and green pants splattered with blood. William hunched over him with his back to me. But I wasn't looking at William. In front of me crouched a monster, a wraith, a dead thing. The sight of him down there, clawing into the guard and bringing chunks of flesh and blood to his mouth, propelled me backwards. I stumbled over a chair and could hear Catherine whimpering behind the bar. William turned as I fell against the chair. He gazed at me, cocking his head as though he recognized me. "William?" I called out. He turned his head from side to side. I inched forward. How did this happen? We were so close. He was almost free. I did this. What other answer could there be? Somehow, without intending it, I'd let William become a wraith and doomed the poor villagers in this tavern. In disobeying my father and trying to save the life of one human, I destroyed these other lives. My options became clear. I promised William I would free him. He snarled and lunged towards me. I stepped aside and he went on, crashing into the chairs behind me. He stumbled, spinning around as I sped forward, knocking him onto his back. I placed a foot on his chest and he struggled underneath. Even with the strength of the undead, it was obvious Wraith's strength couldn't compare with that of the Lilitu. They were no more than beasts. Hot tears fell from my eyes as he pushed against my foot. I knelt, pressing my knee into his chest. He still smelled of peppermint and smoke. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I repeated the phrase over and over as I bent forward, grabbing his head just under his jaw. What else could be said? He didn't deserve this fate. I closed my eyes, wishing to turn back time. He twisted and squirmed, snarling and snapping at the fingers under his mouth, just out of reach. Aside from the short, animalistic fangs, he still looked human. Rabid, but human. Only the eyes were dead. Two dull, gray, flat discs in the middle of his still bruised face. So, wraiths didn't heal like us. William, I choked out in between sobs. It's time for you to go home. For a moment, it seemed as though he understood. He stopped fighting and watched me. I tightened my grip around his face and pulled upward with all of my strength. A loud cracking, squelching sound cut through the air. Skin and muscle and bone separated with reluctant tendrils, like lovers pulled apart after a lifetime together. Blood pumped from the vacant stump of neck as his heart beat out its final tune, spurred on by the blood of the guard. When finally his blood stopped pouring and the body beneath me ceased its twitching, I stood and took stock of the damage. What a mess. I could have collapsed into a pile of my own nerves, but there was still work to be done. 2 guards stood at the gate, but only one body lay in the bar. What had created this change? I'd caused this carnage by bringing him here, but I had no idea how these creatures came to be, just that they came from us. I could sense them like I could my own family. And if they came from us, according to Yuri's notebook, the making of Lilitu has something to do with sharing blood. Right. The wraith in the city, the stink of its flesh lingered in my nostrils. Its blood, mingled with its victims, covered its clothes and no doubt entered William's wounds. So that's how they're created, through the blood, like an infection. I wrapped William's head in a makeshift sack from a nearby apron. His blood seeped through the white fabric, a little red line and dots forming a grotesque smiling face. I turned my attention to the guard on the floor. William, no, the wraith, for these weren't the actions of my friend, had dug into the guard's chest, leaving a gaping wound. It would seem they hungered for flesh as well as blood. Curious. The guard showed no signs of rising, but who knows how long it would take for what was it? The virus, the curse. Whatever it was, it killed William in less than a day, from only a few scratches. I knelt and removed the guard's head as I had William's. I placed it in the sack and tossed the bundle over my shoulder. My God. Catherine trembled in the center of the room. She held Liam to her breast as Elias hid behind her. She stared at me in terror and gripped the tiny boy so tight I thought she might crush him. Her mind jumped from thought to thought. How to escape, fear that she'd lost a child. The loudest was regret for letting a monster into her home. She didn't mean William. Liam's heart beat, faint and rapid like the wings of a hummingbird. Was he scratched or bitten? I asked. She shook her head, her knuckles turning white against her son's back. She stumbled backwards as I moved towards her. She wanted to fight me, to run with her sons, but fear kept her from acting. Her heart thumped when I pulled the boy from her hands as easy as though she had passed him to me. Her immediate sobs told a different story. I inspected Liam's tiny, unconscious body, peering through the dried blood staining his golden curls. Redness marked a wound, probably from hitting his head. It hadn't come from nails or teeth. I placed him back into her arms. He'll be okay. I'm sorry this happened, Catherine. She whimpered as I sniffed the air, searching for the other guard. I inhaled his scent within the building, but he wasn't moving. I'll keep my word, I said, before heading towards the third body. I'll get your boys out of here. They'll have a good life. She nodded, but she didn't believe me. She and Elias watched me leave with the same word booming from their heads. Monster. Chapter 10. I sent for someone to clean the mess in the tavern before leaving the village. When I arrived back at the manor, I tossed a bag of heads into the fireplace and dragged myself towards my room. The sun had begun its climb, leaving me more exhausted than I had expected. The extra blood and EDS should have brought me through the morning, but my eyes drooped and my limbs dragged with each step. Halfway up the stairs, a new thought occurred to me. What stopped Sephora from returning to my room? She changed her mind about killing me earlier, so what's to say she wouldn't change it again? Cayenne had said Victor could help me, but he'd be asleep by now. I turned around and headed down into the basement where we housed our armory, a dark maze comprised of halls and doors. In all my months here, I'd never spent much time in the basement, never needed to. Some of the rooms had been locked for longer than I could remember. I turned the corner towards the armory and swiped my access card at the door. It opened with a hiss. I entered the low-lit room with one goal in mind, a silver dagger. We stocked standard weapons, enough to kill humans and other beings, but in a hidden corner, a safe held those weapons that proved dangerous even to us. We didn't keep many. A few blades, various firearms and special explosives, and weapons I didn't recognize, all worth a fortune in silver. I picked up a long needlepoint dagger with a leather-wrapped handle. I inserted it into the matching sheath, attached the dagger to my belt, and left the room. I shuffled on weighted feet up the stairs and down the hall to my bedroom. I stuck my head into the room. Empty. My hand wrapped around the hilt at my waist as I crept across the room. Minutes of silence stretched by before I gave in and collapsed onto my bed, face first. I wanted to sob, to mourn, but exhaustion weighed on my body like stone. Sunlight peeked through the curtains, and I waited for sleep to take me. Let me disappear into the black emptiness that encompassed Lilitu as we slumber, the sleep where no fear or sadness touched me. Or I could walk through the hazy dreamscape of clouds where I sometimes found myself, even though those dreams caused me to sleepwalk. I preferred that to lying in the dark, hearing that word in my head over and over. Monster. I take it your plan failed. I turned over to find Mia leaning against the doorway. Did you know? I sat up on my elbows. She smirked. I glared at her. You've hunted these things. Did you know they could infect humans? Did you know he was going to turn? I've never seen it happen. She paused and looked away, a small smile lighting her face. But I did have a theory. Why are you so cruel, Mia? Cayenne chose me over you, and so you hate me. I guess I get that. Her smile faded. But how could your jealousy run so deep that you would endanger so many lives, not to mention our own livelihood? She turned and started down the hallway. Why does everyone in this family refuse to answer questions? I ran after her and grabbed her arm, forcing her to face me. It was too late in the morning for either of us to speed. She didn't have the option to run anymore. You've been an asshole to me since day one. I forced the words through clenched teeth, trembling as rage replaced the exhaustion I had felt. Her stoic face only spurred me on. I get it, Mia. Yuri told me. You were a Kyanite. Kyan found you in one of his abbeys. I'm sure that was amazing for you. You had devoted your soul to him, and there he was in your little cloister. Her eyes narrowed as I spoke. Your God found you worthy of his gift, of eternal life by his side. You must have been delirious with bliss. Her face reddened. I'm sure it hurt you when you learned that he didn't want you by his side, but for you to be his soldier. And along I come, the one he calls his princess, whatever that title means. You must be devastated. She swallowed hard and took a step closer. Her face hovered nearly an inch from my own. I could smell the cherry shampoo she was fond of, mingling with blood and sweat into a sweet bouquet of fragrance. You are a fool, she whispered. Maybe the stress of the day overwhelmed me, or maybe the morning hour, but sleep pulled me in as sudden as death. I reached out for her as my legs buckled and her arms wrapped around me. As the darkness closed in, a strange look crossed her face. I could almost believe she was worried. Chapter 11. Once again I stood alone in the black corridor as pillowy clouds bubbled around my feet. The crying woman wasn't there this time. Instead, a screen hung on a black stone wall. Silent video flickered of a sterile, sunlit room. People shuffled around in hospital gowns and thin white slippers. What are you doing in here, Miss Sylvain? Aren't you tired? A nurse walked towards me, reaching out to me from behind the screen. The scene switched to a busy industrial kitchen. Cooks bustled around, carrying pots and pans from station to station. An elderly man in a wife chef's uniform paused to smile at me. Chocolate's in the pantry. Don't let the nurses see you in here, miss. He chuckled as though he had told a joke and scuttled over to a stove to stir something inside a large pot. The view spun around the kitchen before landing on a long magnetic strip holding a set of sharp, glistening knives. The scene changed again, and I found myself sitting in a stone room on a stone chair, participating now, no longer just watching. I tried to stand, but I was glued in place. The air in the room grew heavier and heavier, oppressive in its thickness, and a coldness tightened around me. This was my crypt for 9 centuries. Sephora emerged from the darkness and draped herself over a large stone block in front of me. I reached for the dagger in my belt. Not only was there no belt, but my entire outfit had changed. In its place, I wore a white nightgown. I was helpless against her. I lay buried, she went on, forced to sleep for an eternity by people of your blood, the Vigari Frederic. She spit out those last words as though they burned her tongue. Fire flashed in her eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, squirming in the stone chair. The Vigari who? Her laughter rang through the darkness. No, dear, of course you don't. Still, it is thanks to you that I am awake now. She smiled. So I am going to give you a gift in return. Vibrant images of a slumber party flashed through my mind. A group of girls played in a room. A vision shot through my body like lightning, and when it passed, terrified looks painted the girls' faces. A mother and father, my mother and father, comforted me. My mother tucked me into a bed while my father sent the girls home. The last image Sephora left in my head was that of Cayenne as he tore my true parents apart. I awoke in my own bed in a nightgown. Mia must have changed my clothes. I wasn't sure what I thought about her undressing me as I slept, but I couldn't dwell on that. She'd had the good grace to leave the dagger under my pillow. I said a silent prayer of thanks as I wrapped my fingers around the cool leather hilt. I left my hand under the pillow and sat up straight. A chill ran down my spine. He hadn't hidden his presence from me in months, but I'd failed to notice him all the same. Cayenne sat, as always, in that massive green chair. He watched me as though I was the most interesting thing in the room, which was entirely possible. How did the ancient ones entertain themselves? How did one like us choose to spend an immortality of blood and darkness? His intense watchfulness unsettled me. He leaned back, his eyes never wavering, his fingers steepled together in that easy, dominating manner of his, in a way that said, I am in control here. I am a being untouched by the ravages of time, and therefore I have no fear of death or anything. A smug smile played across his lips, a familiar face, as though he found every moment amusing. That is, every moment when he wasn't throwing a tantrum. I loved that smile when I first awakened. I did everything I could to bring it forward, to help it grow and broaden into a grin. Now it stirred something else within me. Now I wanted to wipe it from his face. You knew, I said. It wasn't a question. If Mia had an idea that William would become a wraith, Cayenne knew without a doubt. He nodded. You had to learn the consequences of your choices, my girl. I know it was hard for you, but I couldn't risk you endangering this family like that again. Endangering the family? What about our villagers? He killed two men and would have devoured an entire family had I not shown up. Casualties? He leaned forward, crossing his legs. They are replaceable. We are not. He paused and brought his hand up to his chin to stroke the shadow of stubble. His manicured nails, along with a myriad of jewelry adorning his neck and hands, twinkled in the light of the moon. It struck me as odd that someone with such time and power focused so much on vanity, but Cayenne had a particular fondness for beautiful things. Over the summer, he told me one reason he had chosen each of us, besides our individual qualities, was that he found us beautiful enough to look at forever, like statues in a museum. Statues and casualties and experiments. Erie once told me Cayenne viewed the world from a distance, and I was starting to believe him. Cayenne stood, a wicked smile twisting his mouth. He walked to the window and spoke to me without looking back. I have indulged many of your whims. You are my daughter, and I want nothing more than to make you happy for all your days. You won't receive harsh punishments like the others, but I needed you to see the damage your thoughtlessness could cause. He faced me then and came to stand right in front of me, just as he had that first night and so many after. He looked down on me with affection and a hint of sadness, as though he had simply grounded me. He played the doting father well. I have a message from Sephora, I whispered. His eyes narrowed at the name. Has she returned since last night? He asked. In Janara? That's what she called the place in my dreams. She said she'd spent 900 years there. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. She told me you took something from her, and now she plans to repay you. He turned his head. She's a mad woman, and you're safe with me. His tone said we'd reached the end of the discussion. He bent forward, reaching out. He was going to touch my hair, run his fingers through the tight coils, or perhaps he would lift me into his arms to embrace me as though all was well. I placed my hand against his chest, stopping his descent. There's more. She showed me something. I waited for his reaction. He swallowed hard, his brows knit over his narrowed eyes. I smiled in spite of myself. The memories I had seen in Gennaro replayed in my head, the gift Sephora gave me. A man and woman forced to pray to a beast before it tears them apart. A wife and husband killed trying to save their child, and the face of the beast himself. I stood before Cayenne could react and plunged the dagger deep into his chest. The force behind the blow would have sent my hand straight through a less impenetrable being. He stumbled backwards into the chair and blinked up at me. I moved closer. His blood sizzled as it trickled past the silver blade, staining his fine clothes and the green fabric beneath him. His face twisted in shock and questioning. For a moment, I wanted to run to him, to help my papa. But he'd murdered my true parents, right? And, as he'd said, he had to learn the consequences of his choices. He pulled the dagger from his chest and threw it aside. He pressed his hands against the wound as he fought to catch his breath. Cayenne always appeared intimidating and powerful, but in this moment he seemed no more than a frightened young man, just a scared little boy. I stood over him. I was a child when you killed my parents and took me. His eyes widened, rings of gold surrounding dark green discs. His words came through labored breaths. I needed to protect you. Please. By locking me away? My voice heightened beyond my control. You took my identity. You turned me into a slobbering servant, your mindless bride, a doll for some sick fucking experiment. My head lightened as I neared hysteria, and my voice cracked as I spoke. You made me a monster. I dropped onto the bed, pulled by the weight of what I had done. Cayenne closed his eyes as I sobbed into my hands. And still, I can't hate you. I'm sorry, Papa. Couldn't we go back to when we were gods? Back to ignorance? Couldn't I love the man I called my father as fully as I did the day we'd chosen my name? That day when I first swam in his eyes. Now, the knowing of how I became his tainted that love. His. He was a beast and he needed to be stopped. Even knowing that, the guilt burrowed into me, twisting my heart and mind. He created me. And he loved me. In his own misguided way, he'd tried to protect me. Quiet chuckling cut through the sound of my sobbing. My foolish, ungrateful girl. Cayenne loomed over me, his face dark and menacing. Blood stained his clothes, but the wound beneath had already healed. For the first time since I awakened, I feared he might hurt me, like he did with Mia and Yuri. He grabbed my wrist and pulled me against his chest. His blood covered the front of my nightgown, sticking our clothes together. He sneered at me. I trembled, staring into his pitch-black eyes, sent cold chills through my limbs. You were never supposed to become Lilitu, but I saved you, he growled. I made you my heir and locked away your scars. This is what I get for my efforts. He gripped my hair and yanked my head to the side. Did you forget, my princess, that you are mine forever? I screamed as his teeth plunged into my neck. The pain spread down my back and it felt like my head would explode. He drank until my vision blurred and I could no longer stand on my own. He held me pressed against him, drinking until I almost lost consciousness. The idea ran through my mind that he would drain me entirely, when he dropped me onto the bed and left. Chapter Chapter 12. I lay in silence for hours, drained but refusing to close my eyes. The door creaked open and Anna's scent wafted in. She sat on my bed, wrapped her arms around my neck, and pressed a wrist to my lips. She grunted, a soft, urgent sound. Blood, sticky and sweet, dripped onto my lips, and my mouth opened on instinct. I sank my teeth into her wrist and lost myself in ecstasy. Anna was unlike anyone I'd ever tasted. There were no memories, no worries, nothing other than the heaven of her blood. My heart pounded and my skin tingled as I drank. Pleasure rippled from my forehead to my toes, and I shivered when she pulled away. Euphoria. No wonder Victor craved it. Time stretched on, and I thought I might never come down from the high of Anna's blood. I floated on a sea of glass beads, all round and smooth. They rolled down my arms and legs, back up my sides and stomach, massaging and tickling my flesh. Unknown hours passed while I remained in that blissful state. When I came down, the house was quiet. I had spent the entire night drugged. That was his punishment for me. He drained me, then drugged me so that I couldn't even experience the pain he'd caused me, and so I couldn't run. With the effect wearing off, I could try to think straight. I was trapped. Cayenne had made that clear. His twisted love for me meant he'd never let me go on his own. But how could I stay and forgive him? How could he forgive me? We'd wronged one another, and I couldn't decide whose wrong was worse. His distorted vision of what's right led him to do what he thought was necessary to protect me. With Sephora's twins and things like wraiths roaming around all these years, that wasn't too hard to believe. Since I awakened, he'd done everything possible to give me and our entire family a life befitting God's. I repaid him with a blade in the heart. What a fine pair we made. I paced my room, circling around the green chair. That chair where he watched me night after night. That chair I curled up in when Cayenne went out of town so that I could feel him closer. The constant reminder that he was always watching. He knew me inside and out. He knew my past and planned my future. And he did it all from that green chair. The same chair where Sephora, a powerful and dangerous Lilitu, showed me the truth Cayenne never wished me to know. In a fit of frustration, I picked up the heavy chair and spun around, throwing it through the large window. The glass shattered and rained down onto the courtyard as the chair crashed on the stone steps, and I ran to the window. After such a loud crash, it was only a matter of time before someone came to investigate. Without thinking, I leapt through the broken window and took off running as soon as I hit the ground, speeding towards the shore to Frodsham. Frodsham? Our small boat bobbed on the gentle waves like slopes pushing out to the dark sea. Across the Weaver, faint lights burned in the distant buildings. I could disappear through a merchant city like Frodsham. I untied the rope holding the boat and prepared to set off. Haven't you learned already? You can't escape him. Mia strutted towards me and put one foot in the boat, preventing it from moving any further. Let me take my chances. You'll be happier once I'm gone. I tried to push her leg from the boat, but she didn't budge. Her thigh felt warm beneath the lacy stockings. She must be just back from a hunt. She rolled her eyes. If his Kakoni disappears, who do you think he'll send after you? You don't have to look for me. You could tell him I walked into the sun, or the sudden sting of her hand on my face brought light to my eyes. I blinked in confusion for a minute before she grabbed my shoulders and forced me to face her. Don't you ever joke about killing yourself. Chase! She shook me as she spoke. What is wrong with you, Joe? When she realized what she'd said, she stepped out of the boat and turned away. She stomped a few feet across the shore. I followed behind as she marched through the sand. Jolene, that was my name, right? That's what she called me. Mia spun around halfway across the shore. Red-tinted tears darkened her lashes and spilled down her pale cheeks. She avoided my eyes. My memories are returning, I pressed. I've seen you, your hands at least, in the hospital. You were there with me, weren't you? You didn't always hate me, so what did I do? She looked at me, right into my eyes. The wind whipped her hair into a burning halo around her face. She wanted to scream. I could feel it, see it rising like steam from her skin. It's as you said. I met God, and he wasn't as I expected. She looked away again, sniffing at the tears pouring freely down her cheeks. Why does it matter? What? I stepped back. Why? He killed my birth parents. Mia, he lied to me. She scoffed, marching back towards the river. So the way you got here is fucked up. But can you honestly say that you don't love being Lilitu? That the power and thrill of the hunt don't set you on fire? I blinked, unable to answer. She was right. I did love being Lilitu, and while there were a few humans I found fascinating, the thrill of their blood was undeniable. Merely thinking of it excited me. I shook my head. I stabbed him. How can I go back from that? Mia stepped towards me, crossing her arms at her waist. We all have our own messed up relationships with Kyan, but we're still a family, Rio. She bit her lip. There was more. I knew she had more to say. She closed her eyes and bit harder. A trail of blood dripped down her chin, and I understood. I brought my lips to hers, sucking where she'd pierced the plump bottom. Her mouth, as soft as petals, tasted of salted caramel. Her body pressed against mine, and a shiver ran through my center. Then I saw what she couldn't say. I saw myself before I became Lilitu. Cayenne sent Mia to watch me. For 3 years we built a friendship. She kissed me, and when Cayenne found out, he took her away and punished her. I saw that too. I felt it through her as though it still happened. The burns, the lashings, and the devilish vault where flames licked at her thighs and silver chains seared into her arms. Then I saw my own body lying on my bed. I watched as Anna washed and changed me from a blood-soaked medical gown into a doll-like sleeper, the one I'd awakened in. Cayenne and Tabitha directed her from the sides. Cayenne's voice echoed, "She won't remember you. She won't remember any of it. It's for her own good." He was right. I hadn't remembered her. I didn't remember that I'd loved her once. She sank to her knees, breaking the kiss, and covered her face in her hands. She didn't hate me. She mourned me. And in all these months I turned a blind eye to her suffering. I suppose that was how Cayenne had designed it. I looked out across the river. If I run away, he will find you, and then he'll send me. She looked up at me, pleading in her eyes. And if I refuse to return? Her head drooped into her hands, and her shoulders slumped forward. She seemed smaller, more fragile than ever before. A girl playing dress-up in her studded red leather jacket and spiked boots. I knelt beside her and pulled her into my arms. She cried, and we sat on the shore long after her sobbing ended, until the sky lightened. When the sun peeked over the horizon, we made our way back to the manor. Neither she nor I spoke as we climbed the stairs to the front door. She had shown me everything, but our time together remained an empty space in my memory. Chapter 13. We entered the bright foyer of the manor and exchanged a sorrowful glance before parting. She went towards the dance room, but I craved sleep. Everything Mia felt was written on her face, and something like a memory came to me, more of a feeling I couldn't explain. Before I thought any more of it, a commotion down the hall brought us back together at the bedroom doors, and we ran to investigate. It came from Samson's room. He thrashed from wall to wall, holding his hands to his ears. Tabitha and Victor tried to catch him, to pin him down, but he jerked like a wild animal. Victor grabbed his arm, but he broke away, leaping out of the window. Should I go after him? Mia's hand rested on the holster at her hip. Tabitha shook her head. No. He's too dangerous. He should have been out for a few days. That serum's powerful. We've tested it. Well, apparently not powerful enough, Mia countered. No one can control another Lilitu like that, waking his body without consciousness, other than a being as powerful as Cayenne or his original sire. Victor slipped his arms around Tabitha's waist. She turned and buried her face in his chest. I don't know anyone with that kind of power. An idea sparked in my mind. Sephora? What if she's Sire Samson? Impossible, ma petite. She would have still been in her crypt. She didn't rise until you. He stopped speaking when Tabitha tapped his chest. Did she think I didn't see? What did I do? I asked. She said she's awake because of me. Victor stood in the doorway. That isn't important right now, Cherie. We must make our family whole again and figure out how to bring Samson home. He moved to the door in 2 strides, and Tabitha followed. Mia looked away when I tried to meet her gaze. I wouldn't be getting any more confessions tonight. Wait, if Sephora didn't sire him, then... He understood my meaning. We, he said. There is another. 2, in fact. Twin sisters, Rania and Eileen. I've never met them, but Cayenne told me who they are. A demented duo. They served Sephora, but disappeared when she was put into the ground. It would seem they've resurfaced. Mia and Tabitha's eyes both widened. Why have I never heard of these twins? Tabitha crossed her arms over her chest. Victor trailed a finger down the side of her face. I was sworn to secrecy, my sweet. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each of us. If Sephora has returned, the time for secrets is over. Tabitha bit her lip and looked away. Are there more? She asked after a moment. Victor said his jaw but said nothing. I clenched my fists. All this time, Yuri had hunted for Lilitu, and Victor and Cayenne had kept these 3 hidden. Victor turned to leave. When Cayenne gets home, tell him I've gone to investigate. With that, he left the room, waving as he went. Tabitha started to follow, but I grabbed her arm. If I couldn't get answers about my own history, I could at least try to help someone else. Can we let Yuri out of the vault? She looked at me, puzzled. I lowered my voice to a whisper. With Samson breaking free of Cayenne's serum, Cayenne gone for who knows how long, and you all running off to do whatever it is you're going to do, I need someone on my side. We're all on your side, dearest. She hugged me tight, pressing my head against her chest. But I understand. You'll find them in the forest. She kissed my forehead, hugging me once more, then sped after her husband. I looked around the wrecked room. Mia had disappeared, and I stood alone. Whatever. I wouldn't be alone for long. I rose early in the evening and set out to find my brother. Samson had taken me hunting in these woods a few times in the last 9 months, but I'd seen nothing that resembled a vault. Of course, I'd never hunted alone. Samson and I would release our chosen prey into the forest and let them survive a day or 2 before hunting them down. Our own twisted game of hide and seek. but now I determined to search every hidden inch of the silver forest. I entered across the courtyard and climbed to the top of a tree to listen. Would I hear him if he cried out? Would he even be conscious? I had glimpsed the devilish chamber he was being held in through Mia's blood. I saw the fire. I heard her screams. Leaping from tree to tree, I listened and scanned the golden canopy. Even in the dark of night, the fall leaves gave a life and beauty to Livse's black skies. I searched for hours, leaping from ground to canopy and back again so as not to miss an inch. Around midnight, I made it to the area of forest behind the village. The villagers already slept in their cabins. Even the tavern was quiet. 3 nights had passed since I'd killed the wraith William, and I hadn't returned to the village to check on Catherine. She'd never want to see me anyway. Rosalind had reported that the villagers were more afraid of us than ever. Fear made people unpredictable and dangerous, she'd written. It was best to avoid the village altogether. I crept through the trees, crawling on my knees as I searched the ground for any sign of a hidden structure. I sniffed through dirt like a wild dog. Samson's wolves guarded the forest surrounding the village, and they watched me from a distance. I sent out a silent call. Find Yuri. Take me to the vault. The wolves scattered, and in minutes their melancholy howls filled the night. I followed their voices to a cluster of trees in the far east end of the island. The alpha pawed at a patch of dirt before dashing back towards the village with the pack at his heels. I sped to the spot the wolf had indicated and dug into the soil with ferocious speed. Ah! I yelped and withdrew my hands from stinging metal. A silver handle protruded from the ground. I wrapped my jacket from my hands and pulled around my hands and pulled the handle with all my strength. A seam cracked the earth and spread, revealing a door that concealed beneath it a long, narrow staircase. I stared into a black corridor, dark even for my immortal eyes. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The air coming from the darkness reeked of blood, old and stale and heavy. 14. I followed the stench down into a deep concrete chamber. The chamber looked empty except for a small access panel on the far wall, the same sort of panel I'd seen at the laboratory. Was there a hidden room here? I searched my pockets for my access card. It worked for the armory, and something told me it would work here. I swiped the card and the wall cracked, sliding open. Behind it, flames leapt from the ground in violent spurts. Yuri groaned in the center of the room. Silver chains from the ceiling held his wrists above his head, and he hung like a limp toy. Holes littered his singed clothes, and blisters covered the exposed skin. He could sense my presence, I knew, but he didn't move. I searched the room, speeding around the edges of the fire until I found an old metal lever. I yanked it upwards, and the flames swirled and sucked into the floor. Moonlight dotted the room through the perforated ceiling. Apparently, the fire and silver weren't enough torture. Cayenne exposed them to the sun, too. I sped to my brother's side, calling his name. After a while, he looked up at me. I didn't need to speak out loud what I meant to do, and he nodded in agreement. Before I changed my mind, I reached up and twisted his wrists, one after the other, until they released with a loud crack. He pulled his hands through the burning cuffs and bit back a scream as he collapsed to the ground. I sent out a silent call, and soon an old wolf padded down the stairs and into the chamber. Without hesitation, Yuri latched onto the creature, drinking with vicious abandon. When he finished, most of his wounds had healed. He wiggled his fingers at me. You rebel girl. He laughed and headed towards the stairway, waving at me to follow. Once we reached above ground, he embraced me and kissed my face. Thank you, little Rose, but you know Cayenne won't like this. I don't care. I couldn't leave you in there. And now I must go. Oh, there's a phone call. And now I must go. At least until Cayenne cools his heels. He turned and ran towards Rosam's shore, and I followed alongside him. Would Cayenne ever forgive us for this? What punishment awaited me for releasing Yuri? Don't worry, darling girl. He'd never truly hurt you. Yuri weaved between the trees in short bursts of movement. It might have been comical if I wasn't so worried about what Cayenne would do when he returned. Yuri had been in the fires of the vault for hours, yet he bounced back as though he'd only been slapped on the hand. But Yuri was stronger than me, and I'd already sparked Cayenne's fury. He slowed as we neared the shore and reached the little boat. He embraced me there, his arms strong and warm with the wolf's blood. The fire had left a few blisters, staining his otherwise beautiful face. His hair and clothes still smelled of burnt fibers and flesh, yet he smiled. How was it possible that our family, could be so cavalier about Cayenne's temper? He wasn't always this way. Yuri stepped past me and sat in the boat. The vault was for others, if we ever saw others. He never used such harsh punishments to get us in line. He looked down as though lost in a memory. Before, it was a good whipping, which some of us enjoyed. Or he'd just lock our credit accounts. But then you came, and Papa Bear got overprotective. We learned to live with it, dear girl, because what else could we do? He shrugged, untying the anchor ropes. But you, little Rose, he suffers over the pain he's already caused you. Yuri didn't know the depth of my betrayal, that I had tried to kill our creator. Cayenne may have been devoted before, but I feared that I had broken one too many rules. Yuri chuckled at my expression. If you're really afraid, why don't you come with me to Tibet? We'll scale the Gandhishan Mountains. There are rumors of an immortal living somewhere within the range. I've been trying to find him. I touched his shoulder. They're here, Yuri. Don't you know that? He looked up at me, weary and still spotted red. I told him about Sephora and her two servants, what I had done to Cayenne, and Samson's strange behavior. When I finished recounting my tale, he took me in his arms and held me for a long time. My dear, sweet little Rose, come with me. We'll send word to Tabitha once we reach Monaco. Then we'll disappear for a little while. Monaco? Can't we fly further than that between refills? We sat in the boat and he pushed us away from the shore. We can't fly, he spoke between paddle strokes. I may be a great pilot, but Cayenne can track our planes, and he needs time to calm down. We'll travel by land and sea. It should take us no more than 3 weeks to get where we're going. He grinned at me, a beautiful look which somehow reminded me that we'd be okay. After Monaco, we won't be able to use our access cards either, so get as much cash as possible. Cayenne can still find us with magic, but from what you've said, he might have other priorities. I don't think he'll follow us that far. Okay, guys. I think we will stop there for now. I'll be back, probably not tomorrow, probably in a couple days, to continue with part 3, chapter 15, and onward. Hello, Mila. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, hit the bell so that you can get a notification whenever there is a new video. And I will see you later for write-in. And have a beautiful, happy, wonderful day. Until then. And remember always, always, always that I love you. Take care of yourselves. Bye.